For nearly 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were Hollywood's golden couple, the love story everyone admired. But behind the smiles, the red carpets, and the public affection, a quiet unraveling was taking place. In 2025, their picture-perfect marriage came to an end, and the truth of their relationship was laid bare. What went wrong? And how did one woman find the strength to walk away when love alone couldn't save it? To the world, they were proof love could survive anything. For almost 20 years, people looked at Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban as a couple who had somehow avoided the usual Hollywood story of fast love and faster heartbreak. They appeared calm, steady, and deeply loyal to each other. When they walked on red carpets, they held hands naturally, not forced. When they spoke about each other in interviews, their voices carried warmth and familiarity. They were elegant without being cold, famous without acting untouchable. People felt like they were seeing something real. In a place where relationships often fall apart under attention, theirs seemed to grow stronger. Fans connected to them because they represented something people quietly wished for in their own lives: a love that lasts. Nicole had already gone through one very public marriage and painful divorce, and Keith had fought personal battles before finding his footing. The idea that two people who had lived through loss and struggle could find peace in each other was comforting. People saw their relationship as a beautiful second chance. It gave hope to anyone who had ever been hurt or disappointed. Many believed that if they could make it work in an environment full of pressure, fame, travel, and outside eyes, then maybe lasting love was truly possible. Another reason people felt attached to their story was how different they were. Nicole came from the world of international cinema, controlled, polished, and graceful. Keith came from the country music world, open-hearted, emotional, grounded. Their differences made them feel balanced, like puzzle pieces that fit. It was the kind of pairing that made people say, "See, you don't need to be the same to be perfect for each other." Their smiles looked genuine, not rehearsed. Their affection appeared simple, not staged. In a time when many celebrity couples seemed temporary or rushed, they were seen as slow-burning and steady. They talked about communication, loyalty, and family. They often mentioned keeping each other grounded. Their public image became strong, almost symbolic. They didn't just look like a couple in love, they looked like a couple protecting that love. And because Nicole had faced painful experiences before, many people rooted for her happiness. They wanted this to be her forever home, her final peaceful chapter. The image of Keith supporting her and Nicole supporting him created a sense of balance that people admired. Their life also looked relatable in certain ways. Despite fame, they were often photographed doing normal things, holding coffee cups, walking with their children, laughing together during small moments. These images made people feel like they were seeing a couple who did not let fame change the core of who they were. They seemed stable in a world known for instability. When magazines and social media talked about them, it was usually positive. They became a reference point. When other celebrity relationships ended, people would say, "At least Nicole and Keith are still strong." Their love story became a kind of reassurance, something gentle that people trusted. Many believed that if a love like theirs existed, then maybe the world was not as cold as it sometimes seemed. Their marriage was not just admired, it was emotionally important to many. It was a story people wanted to believe in, a symbol that love can stay, even in difficult places. But the truth behind that perfect picture was already beginning to crack. Some love stories don't begin with fireworks, they begin with recognition. When Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban met in 2005 at the Good Day USA Gala in Los Angeles, it didn't look like the start of something dramatic. It was a formal event celebrating Australian success abroad. There were speeches, cameras, polite conversations, and people moving from one group to another. But in that busy room, something quiet happened. They noticed each other, Not in a loud or flashy way, but in the way two people who have lived through deep emotional experiences sometimes do. It was recognition, the sense that the person standing in front of you understands something you don't have to explain. Nicole was 38 at the time. Outwardly, she was in a strong place. She had just won an Oscar for her role in The Hours, and her career was secure, respected, even admired. But on the inside, she was still healing from her divorce from Tom Cruise, a marriage that had lasted more than a decade and ended with emotional confusion and public attention that left her unsure of who she was. She had lost more than a relationship. Her sense of home, emotional safety, and even her identity had been shaken. She also carried the deep pain of slowly losing connection with her two adopted children, Isabella and Connor, who had remained closer to Tom after the separation. The world saw her elegance and strength, but privately, she carried loneliness. She longed for a family again, not just children, but a feeling of belonging, trust, and emotional closeness. Keith Urban was 37, a rising country musician who was gaining recognition in the United States. On stage, he was confident, energetic, and charming. But offstage, he had been fighting battles he rarely spoke about openly. For years, he had struggled with addiction. There were periods of recovery and periods of relapse. He was used to smiling through pain, performing even when his heart felt heavy, and pretending everything was fine. Fame gave him success, but it did not solve loneliness. The road was full of people, but most of them did not know him deeply. He also carried his own sense of longing for steadiness, for emotional peace, for something that felt safe and real. When they met, it wasn't attraction alone that drew them together. It was recognition of familiar wounds. Nicole saw someone gentle, talented, and hurting. Someone who tried to cope, but was tired of carrying everything alone. Keith saw someone strong, yet soft. Someone who had survived heartbreak, but still had room left in her heart. Both had lived through public lives and private pain. Both knew what it was like to smile while hurting. Their connection didn't move quickly at first. In fact, Keith later admitted that he didn't call her for months after the gala. He said he felt intimidated by her presence, her success, and her calm confidence. Nicole thought he wasn't interested, but when he finally did call, the connection deepened. Quickly. They went from polite acquaintances to people who shared quiet conversations, personal history, and emotional truths. They didn't need to impress each other. Each understood something unspoken about the other. Nicole felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. Keith didn't demand anything from her. He didn't bring drama or control. He brought gentleness. And Keith, who had spent years feeling like he needed to perform emotionally, found Nicole easy to be real with. She listened. She didn't rush him. She didn't try to fix him. She simply understood him. They began to spend more time together away from cameras and public spaces. Their relationship grew privately, not for attention, not for headlines. People who knew them during this period described it as quiet, steady, and natural. They felt like two people who didn't have to pretend. Nicole liked that Keith didn't treat her like a movie star. Keith liked that Nicole didn't treat him like a struggling project. They treated each other like human beings who had been bruised by life but still wanted warmth. The world saw their relationship later, but the foundation was built in silence, in shared stories, in late-night talks, in the relief of finally not being alone in one's pain. They believed they had found someone who understood the parts of them that were difficult to explain to others, the parts shaped by disappointment, loss, and hope. They thought they had finally found someone who understood the darkness they never spoke about. Even the most beautiful beginnings can hold seeds of the ending. When Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban married in June 2006, it looked like the kind of moment people dream about. The wedding took place in Sydney, at St. Patrick's Estate, a historic location overlooking the ocean. It was a candlelit evening ceremony, quiet and warm, filled with close family and friends. There were no loud displays or flashy celebrity excess. It felt personal, emotional, almost fragile. Nicole wore a soft, elegant gown, and Keith sang to her at the reception. Guests described the atmosphere as full of love, sincerity, and hope. The marriage looked like a fresh start for both of them. People believed they were witnessing a love story that would last a lifetime. Nicole, who had once found her personal life exposed and complicated during her previous marriage, seemed to finally be surrounded by peace. She looked genuinely happy. Keith looked grounded and emotional, like the wedding was not just a celebration, but a promise that he could change and build a real family. They held each other closely, not like people trying to impress anyone, but like two people grateful not to feel alone anymore. For many, this wedding felt symbolic. Two hearts that had been hurt by life had finally found safety. But reality does not pause for romance. Only 4 months after the wedding, Keith entered rehab for alcohol addiction. This was not the first time. He had struggled with substances, but it was the first time the world saw how fragile their new marriage really was. For most couples, the early months after a wedding are full of joy, new routines, and shared discovery. For Nicole and Keith, the early months were about survival. When Nicole learned he needed treatment, she did not pull away. She did not panic, complain, or distance herself. She reacted with quiet loyalty. She visited him during treatment, protected him from media attention, and chose to keep many of the details private. She told friends that love meant standing by someone, even when it was hard. She had lost her family once before, and she was determined not to lose this one. She believed that if she remained steady, strong, and calm, they would get through it. The public praised her. Articles described her as devoted, forgiving, and patient. Interviews and award speeches later showed Keith calling her his saving grace, the person who helped him find stability. People admired her strength. It seemed like another chapter in their love story, the chapter where love proves itself through hardship. But inside the marriage, the emotional weight began to shift. Nicole became the protector, the caretaker, the one holding things together. She was gentle and patient, but being responsible for someone's emotional balance is exhausting, even when you love them deeply. Keith, meanwhile, carried shame, pressure, and the fear of disappointing the person who believed in him most. Their roles settled early. She was the strong one, and he was the one who needed saving. On the outside, they still looked perfect. At award shows, Keith would thank Nicole with shaky voice and emotional expression. Nicole would smile proudly beside him, supportive and loving. To fans, it looked like a romantic bond, a relationship where love healed wounds. People pointed to them as proof that real love required patience, forgiveness, and loyalty. But in private, something quiet was happening that neither of them fully recognized at the time. When one person becomes the anchor and the other becomes the one being anchored, the relationship can become unbalanced. Nicole was trying to build a stable home, and Keith was trying to keep up emotionally. Over time, Keith may have started to feel the weight of being the person who needed help, and Nicole may have started to feel the stress of holding everything up, afraid that if she let go even a little, everything would fall apart. Their love was real. Their devotion was not fake. They genuinely cared for each other. But the foundation was already shifting slowly, quietly, and in a way that neither of them wanted to talk about. They continued forward because they believed they could overcome anything, and for many years they did. But saving someone is not the same as loving them, and saving never ends. She had lost a family once, she would not lose another. When Nicole and Keith welcomed their first daughter, Sunday Rose, in 2008, it was more than just becoming parents. For Nicole, it felt like a piece of her heart had finally been returned. After years of longing, of missing the closeness she once had with her adopted children from her first marriage, motherhood brought her a kind of peace she had been searching for. Sunday's arrival gave Nicole a sense of home again, something steady, something safe. 2 years later, in 2010, they welcomed their second daughter, Faith Margaret. Their home in Nashville became the center of Nicole's world. She poured her love, time, and energy into raising her girls. She cooked, attended school events, and tried to create a warm and grounded environment. She wanted her daughters to grow up in a place filled with love, not pressure or chaos. Motherhood changed her. It softened her fears, but also strengthened her commitment to keeping her family together. She believed that she and Keith could overcome anything as long as they protected their home life. Nicole was determined to be present, stable, and supportive. She slowed down her work, became more selective with acting roles, and focused on routines that made the girls feel secure. Her identity shifted from just Nicole Kidman, actress, to Nicole, mother, and partner. It wasn't a sacrifice for her, it was something she wanted. But Keith's life did not slow down in the same way. His career in country music depended on tours, albums, public appearances, and time away from home. While Nicole was building structure, Keith was often living on the road, surrounded by travel, performance, noise, and constant movement. Touring was part of his work, part of his passion, but it also meant distance. Nicole spent many nights alone, waiting for calls, watching the clock, making sure the home stayed steady while Keith was gone. She carried the emotional center of the family, making sure the children felt secure even when their father, she wasn't physically there. At first, she accepted this balance. She told herself that every marriage has differences and that supporting Keith's career was part of loving him. She believed stability came from patience and understanding. She remembered what it felt like to lose family and promised herself she would never let distance or silence take over again. But as the years passed, the emotional weight began to settle unevenly. Nicole was not only the mother of their children, she became the emotional caretaker of the marriage. When Keith returned from tour, the rhythms of home life often clashed with the rhythm of life on the road. On stage, he was energetic, admired, and surrounded by praise. At home, life was quiet, ordinary, slow. Nicole tried to make his return easy, comfortable, and loving. But being the one who always holds things together can become exhausting. She was always the stable one, the one who stayed, the one who forgave quickly, the one who listened deeply. Keith loved his family, but the emotional labor of the relationship fell more heavily on Nicole. She tried to hide the growing strain. She told herself that all marriages require work, especially ones that live under public attention. She reminded herself of the love that brought them together. She believed that if she continued to love consistently, things would stay strong. But even the strongest person can get tired when they are carrying more than their share, even when they love the person they are carrying it for. What the public saw was a beautiful family, 2 daughters growing up in a loving home, 2 parents who supported each other, a couple who still appeared close and connected. And there were real moments of joy, laughter, and shared celebration. But underneath those moments was a quiet imbalance. Nicole was giving more. Keith was leaning more. And the longer this continued, the harder it became to ignore. She held on because love mattered to her, family mattered to her, stability mattered to her. But sometimes holding on requires both people, not just one. And the more she held on, the more the distance grew. Some couples break quietly, others break while the world is watching. As the years passed, the way Nicole and Keith appeared in public began to look different from the way things felt in private. On red carpets, they still held hands, smiled at each other, and stood closely as if nothing had changed. They knew how to pose, how to move in sync, how to look warm and connected. Their interviews often included the same phrases about trust, partnership, and support. They said things like, "We lift each other up," and "We're each other's rock." These words sounded sincere, and maybe they once were, but eventually they became more of a script than a reflection of reality. The public had built an image of them as a perfect couple who had beaten the odds, and there was pressure to keep that image alive. In Hollywood, sometimes a relationship becomes part of your professional identity. People expected them to be the example of stable love. Brands wanted them as a pair. Media outlets celebrated them as the last real love story in the industry, so they performed. Not in a fake or dishonest way, but in a way that felt expected. They knew how to look happy, even when they were tired or emotionally distant. They knew the gestures that made people believe everything was fine. His hand around her waist, her leaning into his shoulder, a shared laugh for the cameras. But behind closed doors, life was not as effortless as those images suggested. Nicole was tired. She had been the one holding the emotional weight of the marriage for many years. She tried to maintain stability, to keep communication open, to create a loving home. But she was still often the one making sure things didn't fall apart. Keith, meanwhile, wanted to be seen as strong, independent, and capable. He was grateful for what Nicole had done for him. But he did not want to be seen as someone who needed saving anymore. The role of being the one who struggled emotionally began to bother him. He was tired of feeling like the person who was always receiving support instead of giving it. This created tension that was subtle but constant. Nicole wanted closeness and honesty. She wanted to feel that they were in the marriage together, with equal effort and shared emotional responsibility. Keith wanted space and freedom. He didn't want to feel like he was under supervision or constantly being looked after. He wanted to prove he was okay, even when he wasn't. When they appeared in public, they looked united. But when the doors closed, those unspoken frustrations remained between them. Their conversations became shorter. Their shared laughter became less frequent. Their home began to feel like a place of routines instead of connection. Nicole tried to bring them closer through small things, dinners together, shared activities, quiet evenings. But Keith often came home tired from touring, mentally drained, or distracted by work. Neither of them wanted to fight, so they didn't. But silence can sometimes be more painful than conflict. Friends began to notice the distance before the public did. They could see that Nicole was trying, but also that she was exhausted. They could see that Keith was physically present when home, but emotionally somewhere else. When asked, they both continued to speak positively about each other because the idea of admitting the gap felt too heavy, too final. Meanwhile, the world continued to praise them as the couple who made it. Magazine covers showed them smiling at events. Interviews presented them as united. People on social media shared photos of them, calling them relationship goals. And because that image was comforting to so many, the couple felt pressure to continue upholding it. It is not easy to step away from being seen as something people admire. So the performance continued. Over time, the performance became habit. They knew when to smile, when to nod, when to touch each other's hands. They knew the right tone to use when speaking about one another in interviews. But the difference between what the world saw and what they felt inside grew wider. Nicole was still holding on, still giving, still trying to fix the distance. Keith was growing restless, wanting to feel like himself again, wanting to live without the weight of being saved. He began to resist the role he felt he had been assigned. He didn't want to feel like he was always being watched for signs of struggle. He didn't want to feel like he had to prove his progress or reassure Nicole that he was okay. He wanted to feel free to be imperfect without disappointing her. But Nicole didn't want control, she wanted connection. The misunderstandings between them deepened. They cared for each other, but they were drifting. To the world, they still looked perfect. To each other, something essential felt missing. They weren't partners anymore. They were characters in a story they couldn't stop acting in. Distance doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives as quiet. By 2023, the cracks that had once been hidden behind their public image became impossible to ignore. Nicole Kidman was filming Practical Magic 2 Inches London, a a project that required long hours on set, away from her family. For her, the job was a chance to immerse herself in work, to focus on something that brought her joy and purpose. But as the months passed, it became clear that her time away was beginning to expose deeper truths in her marriage to Keith Urban. While Nicole was busy with her filming commitments, Keith became increasingly distant. At first, it wasn't something she noticed immediately. There were missed calls. Of course, long days on set meant she didn't always pick up right away. But as time went on, those calls became fewer and fewer. Keith wasn't responding to messages. When he did call, the conversations were brief, cold even. Nicole would ask about the girls, about his day, but his answers were short and distracted. He wasn't just physically absent anymore, he was emotionally checked out. There was no argument, there were no loud fights or moments of crisis. Instead, there was just silence. Keith had always been a man of few words, but this silence felt different. It wasn't the quiet between them that came from comfort or shared understanding. It was the silence that came from withdrawal, from someone who no longer wanted to engage or be present. His emotional absence was becoming harder for Nicole to ignore. She had spent years keeping their lives together, holding on to the belief that if she loved enough, things would get better. But now, it seemed like even love couldn't bridge the gap that had opened up between them. The hardest part for Nicole was that there was no clear reason for it. She couldn't point to one thing that had caused the distance. It wasn't one argument or one moment of betrayal. It was a slow, subtle process, the kind that doesn't make a lot of noise, but eats away at the foundation of a relationship. Nicole began to feel the weight of Keith's absence in every part of her life. She'd make dinner for the girls, wait for Keith's call, only for it to never come or for it to feel hollow. Family gatherings became quieter. The laughter that had once filled their home seemed to fade. By early 2024, whispers of a separation began to spread. It wasn't anything official, nothing that could be confirmed, but the rumors were there. People close to them started noticing that they were living separate lives. Keith had been gone on tour for long stretches of time, but even when he wasn't on the road, he seemed to be emotionally distant. Friends said he had started to retreat into himself, focusing more on his work and less on his family. Nicole, meanwhile, was carrying the emotional load of raising their two daughters alone while trying to maintain the public image of a happy, successful family. At first, Nicole brushed off the rumors. She didn't want to believe them. She still clung to the hope that things would improve, that the distance was just a temporary phase, a rough patch that could be worked through. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. The bond that once felt unbreakable had loosened. She began to wonder if Keith had already mentally checked out of their marriage, even if he hadn't physically left. The silence between them grew louder. Nicole tried to reach out, tried to reconnect, but it felt like she was talking to a wall. She would send texts, leave voice messages, even try to set up video calls. But each time, the response was delayed, or worse, ignored. The emptiness in their communication began to weigh on her. She couldn't fix this on her own. She couldn't make him talk when he didn't want to. She couldn't force him to care when he seemed to have already made up his mind. The woman who had once fought to hold on to her family, who had sacrificed so much for love, was now facing the hardest truth of all, that love alone could not save them. The world outside still believed in their picture-perfect marriage, but the truth inside their home was far from perfect. Nicole spent her days working, caring for the girls, and pretending that everything was fine. But her heart wasn't in it anymore. She couldn't keep pretending that their marriage was strong when Keith's absence spoke louder than any words could. She had been carrying the weight of their relationship for so long, but now she was starting to feel like she was the only one left holding it together. Then came the night everything changed, the night he left. Not every ending comes with a goodbye. The night of the 20th of June 2024 marked a moment that Nicole would never forget. It was a soccer Match in Nashville, an event that should have been a simple outing for the family. Keith was there, by her side, looking like the man he used to be, calm, composed, trying to smile. But there was something different in his eyes, something that Nicole could not quite place. Their interactions felt mechanical, distant. There were no shared jokes, no quiet conversations between the cheers of the crowd. There was no warmth between them, no spark, no connection. They looked like two people who had been caught in a moment that no longer felt real. The public did not see what Nicole saw. They didn't notice the distance, the invisible wall that had built itself between them. The fans cheered, the cameras clicked, and everything seemed normal from the outside. But for Nicole, it felt like the last time she would ever publicly share a space with Keith as a couple. She had tried to keep up appearances, to pretend everything was fine, but deep down, she knew this was the last time they would ever appear together as a happy family. The silence between them had become too loud to ignore, and the pressure of maintaining an image had taken its toll. Later that night, Keith made his decision. He moved out of their Nashville home, quietly, without confrontation. There were no angry words or final moments of resolution. He didn't sit down with Nicole and say, "I'm done." Instead, he left while she was away, leaving their shared space untouched, as though trying to make the departure less real, less painful. It was the kind of exit that felt designed to avoid any messy goodbyes. He simply disappeared from the home they had built together, leaving Nicole to return to an empty house, a house that had once been full of love, laughter, and the sound of their daughter's footsteps. When Nicole walked through the door that night, she felt the emptiness instantly. The silence of the house hit her like a physical blow. She had been away filming in London, juggling work, motherhood, and the distant hope that things would get better when she returned home. But instead of the familiar comfort of home, she was met with cold air, untouched spaces, and the stark reality of what had just happened. Keith was gone, and she hadn't even had a chance to say goodbye. There was no conversation, no closure, no understanding of what had truly led to this moment. As she stood in the doorway, the weight of the situation began to crash down on her. Her mind raced back to the past, to the painful memories of losing her first family after her divorce from Tom Cruise. The feeling of being left behind, of being abandoned, felt eerily familiar. It wasn't just the loss of her marriage that hurt. It was the echo of history repeating itself. She had been here before, in this place of emotional devastation, and it hurt in ways she hadn't expected. She thought she had moved past this kind of heartbreak, but here it was again, raw and present. The hardest part was the quietness of it all. There was no loud fight, no dramatic exit. Keith had slipped away in the night, leaving behind a life that once felt so full of promise and love. He had gone, leaving Nicole to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage and a shattered dream. The absence of confrontation made it harder to process. There was no finality to it, just a slow fade into nothingness. In that moment, Nicole was left alone with her thoughts, with the emptiness of the house, and with the reality of what had just happened. She couldn't stop thinking about the years she had spent protecting Keith, supporting him through his battles, holding their family together. She had given everything, and now she felt like she was left with nothing. It wasn't just the end of their marriage, it was the end of an era she had fought so hard to protect, and one that had slipped away without her even realizing it. But the world still didn't know. The real reckoning was still ahead. 2 signatures ended 19 years, but the wounds were older. When Nicole Kidman officially filed for divorce in September 2025, the world's attention turned immediately to the high-profile breakup. The headlines were quick to form. Hollywood's golden couple breaks apart. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban call it quits after nearly 2 decades. The narrative in the public eye was predictable. A famous couple splitting, the fallout, the drama, the speculation. But the truth behind the filing was far more complicated, far more painful, and far more private than anything the public could have imagined. Nicole had spent months trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. She had hoped Keith would change his mind, that their family could find a way back to the connection they had once shared. But by the time she filed, it was clear that the relationship was beyond repair. Keith had already made his decision. He had quietly moved out of their home, emotionally withdrawn, and mentally checked out of the marriage long before Nicole was ready to admit it. The divorce filing wasn't just a legal step, it was a painful moment of clarity. For Nicole, it was about survival. She had given everything she could, but in the end, she couldn't fight for a marriage that Keith had already left. The timing of the filing was telling. Nicole waited until after Keith had left their home to officially make the move. She didn't want to air their private pain for the world to see, even though the whispers had already started. Her decision wasn't about revenge. It was about letting go. She had spent years protecting him, protecting their family, but now she was finally protecting herself. The world may have viewed her filing as the end of the marriage, but for Nicole, it was the beginning of her own emotional healing. It was a hard choice, but one she had to make. When the divorce papers were made public, the media focused heavily on the high-profile nature of the split, the glamorous couple, the years together, the children. But the reality was more grounded. There were no messy financial battles, no questions of who would get what. Nicole and Keith were financially independent, both successful in their careers, and they had no need to fight over money. The real issue wasn't money. It was emotional clarity. Nicole wanted stability for their daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, and she wanted to make sure that they didn't suffer the same way she had. She asked for primary custody, requesting 306 days a year with their daughters, leaving Keith with the remaining time. It wasn't about control, it was about love. Nicole wanted to protect the peace that she had worked so hard to create for her family. The divorce wasn't about punishing Keith, though some may have interpreted it that way. It was about finding a way forward, for herself and for her daughters, without the constant strain of a relationship that had already ended. Emotionally, Nicole made it clear that she wasn't interested in spousal or child support. She wasn't looking for anything except a way to protect her family and move on from the past. But just as the public began to settle into the idea that the divorce was the end of the story, Keith made his move. On stage in Pennsylvania, just days after the divorce filing, he stepped in front of an audience and made a statement of his own. He performed one of his breakup anthems, but altered the lyrics. Instead of singing the usual lines, he changed the words to "Take your space and take your reasons to take your unreasonable reasons." The crowd gasped. It was a clear, public reaction to the divorce, but it wasn't just a statement of hurt or frustration. It was Keith rewriting the narrative, shifting the blame, and trying to paint himself as the one left behind. Nicole had kept her pain quiet, dignified, and controlled. She had made the hard decision to let go, but Keith was using his platform to change the story. His alteration of the lyrics wasn't just a performance. It was a public declaration of his own version of events. For Nicole, it felt like a betrayal not just of their marriage, but of the emotional trust they had once shared. The world was now witnessing a very different version of the story. Keith's public shift in narrative gave the impression that he had been the one wronged, that he was the one forced into the split. But the reality, as Nicole knew all too well, was far more complicated. She had made her choice, but she had not yet fully processed the depths of his withdrawal. She had filed for divorce, but she had not yet completely understood how deep the emotional divide had become. Then Keith stepped on stage and changed the story. Words can heal, or they can wound. After the divorce, Keith Urban took to the stage, and in one of the most public and emotional moments of his career, he altered the lyrics to one of his songs. The lyrics had always been a reflection of his struggles, but this time, he changed them. During a performance in Pennsylvania, he rewrote the lines of a breakup anthem, singing, "Take your space and take your reasons to take your unreasonable reasons." The crowd was stunned. It wasn't just a song. It felt like an emotional retaliation, a public display of hurt, and a rewriting of the story that had just been made public. For Nicole, this moment was hard to swallow. She had kept her pain private, her heartache buried beneath a dignified exterior. But Keith, in that moment, was taking the narrative and shifting it, presenting himself as the one who was hurt, the one left behind, the one who had been wronged. The emotional depth of the performance wasn't lost on her. His decision to perform this altered version of the song felt like an attempt to rewrite the history of their marriage, to shift the blame, and to make his audience believe that he was the one who had been victimized by the end of their relationship. Nicole had fought for the marriage for years, quietly holding everything together, and now it felt like Keith was turning the tables in front of the world. The rumors surrounding Keith didn't help either. Whispers began to spread about his growing closeness with a younger musician who had been touring with him. The speculation only added fuel to the fire, creating an image of a man who had emotionally checked out of his marriage long before it had ended, and now possibly had someone else filling that emotional space. Nicole knew the rumors were just that, rumors, but the weight of them still stung. In the public eye, Keith had his story. In private, Nicole was left to process the fallout of years of silence and unspoken tension. Despite everything, Nicole refused to retaliate publicly. She chose not to respond to the rumors, not to lash out, not to add fuel to the fire. She stayed silent, letting Keith have his moment, letting him express his pain in whatever way he felt necessary. She could have fought back, could have told her side of the story, could have opened up about the years of emotional labor she had carried for the family, but she didn't. She knew that responding would only keep the public drama alive. She wanted to move on, to heal, to find peace. Her silence wasn't about defending Keith. It was about protecting herself from the endless cycle of hurt and public attention. Nicole had spent so many years protecting Keith's image, keeping his battles and struggles private. Now, she was done. But that didn't mean she would allow herself to be dragged into public conflict. She had already given so much of herself, and now she was focused on the future, on her daughters, on finding balance, on rebuilding her life in peace. But privately, she finally spoke the truth, not to the world, but to herself. Sometimes strength is just choosing not to break. After everything had fallen apart, after years of emotional labor, sacrifice, and the quiet weight of holding up a marriage that had already ended, Nicole Kidman made a choice. She decided to stay in Nashville, not for Keith, but for her daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret. Despite the heartbreak, despite the public scrutiny, despite the endless whispers of what went wrong, she planted her feet firmly in the ground, creating stability for her girls. She understood that her role as a mother would always be more important than the story the world was trying to write about her marriage. For Nicole, staying in Nashville wasn't just about geography. It was about protecting the peace she had fought so hard to build. In the aftermath of the divorce, she could have left, run away from the reminders of her failed marriage, or tried to escape the pain in some way. But she knew that wouldn't heal her or her children. Instead, she focused on creating a space for them that was calm, loving, and grounded. She gave them a home, a real home, not just a place with walls and rooms. She gave them consistency, structure, and love. But as much as she devoted herself to her daughters, Nicole also had to let go of a part of herself that had been built around her role as caretaker. For years, she had been the one to hold it all together, to keep the marriage from falling apart, to make sure Keith was okay, to make sure their family remained whole. But now, that role had ended. She was no longer responsible for someone else's happiness, and that realization hit harder than she expected. It wasn't just a shift in her family dynamic, it was a shift in her own identity. Who was Nicole without the constant pull of caretaking, without the need to put others before herself? The emotional toll of processing love and betrayal simultaneously was exhausting. Nicole had loved Keith deeply. Even after everything, she still did. That love wasn't something that disappeared overnight, but at the same time, she had to come to terms with the fact that the man she had spent years building a life with had stopped fighting for their marriage long before it ended. The man she had supported, who had once been her partner, had walked away. And yet, she had to reconcile that love with the betrayal of it. It wasn't easy, it wasn't clean, but it was necessary. In the quiet moments, when she was alone with her thoughts, Nicole allowed herself to grieve. Not just the loss of Keith, but the loss of an idea she had once believed in, that love could fix everything. She had to confront the truth that sometimes love is not enough. Sometimes, no matter how much you care, you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. She had spent so long trying to hold on to a marriage that was already unraveling. But now, she could see that she had done everything she could. The real challenge was letting go, not just of Keith, but of the idea that her love could be enough to fix the things that had broken between them. But amidst the hurt, amidst the betrayal, there was a quiet reclaiming of herself. Nicole started to rediscover the parts of herself that had been buried beneath the weight of the marriage. She focused on her work, on her career, on her personal growth. She started doing things for herself, not for anyone else. She began to reconnect with her passions, her friends, and the life she had set aside for the sake of her family. She was learning to love herself again, without needing someone else to define her worth. This was no longer a story about the end of a marriage. It was about what remained, the strength she had within herself, the love she had for her daughters, and the woman she was becoming. Nicole had been through the fire, but she wasn't broken. She had found something more resilient, more powerful, and more hers. Not all love stories are failures. Some are lessons. The story of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, like so many in the public eye, holds lessons about love, sacrifice, and the boundaries we set for ourselves. Their relationship was built on deep affection, shared history, and mutual support. But over time, it also became a story of imbalance, with Nicole taking on the emotional weight of their marriage, while Keith, in his own struggle, withdrew. It wasn't that their love wasn't real, it was. But sometimes, love alone cannot hold a relationship together. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to let go. The sacrifices Nicole made were clear. She gave everything to her marriage, believing that love and loyalty would fix the cracks that had slowly formed. She put her own needs aside, sacrificing her own emotional health to care for Keith and their family. But with that sacrifice came a cost. It took years for Nicole to recognize that love doesn't always mean saving someone else. Sometimes it means saving yourself. She had to learn that putting boundaries in place, protecting her peace, and prioritizing her own emotional well-being were not acts of selfishness, but acts of survival. Audiences are drawn to celebrity love stories because they offer a window into something they often crave in their own lives. An ideal, a perfect union, a love that endures. Celebrities like Nicole and Keith represent an image of what we hope love could be: romantic, enduring, and public. But what we often forget is that those stories are not always as perfect as they seem. The public wants to believe in the fairy tale, the couple who can weather every storm, who stand by each other no matter the cost. But the truth is, love requires more than just devotion. It requires two people, both willing to fight for it, both willing to show up. Nicole's journey was one of transformation. She went from being the rescuer, the one who kept everything afloat, to becoming her own protector. She had spent years thinking that if she loved Keith enough, everything would work out. But as she faced the truth of their separation, she realized that love can only go so far. She had to stop saving Keith and start saving herself. In doing so, she found strength and resilience she never knew she had. She didn't just survive. She began to rebuild her life on her own terms. Nicole's story is one of finding clarity through pain, of learning to put her own needs first after years of emotional sacrifice. It's a reminder that sometimes we have to let go of the things that no longer serve us to make space for something better, even if that something better is just peace. Do you think she made the right choice by letting go? Let us know in the comments.